Insights from Frontline Ministry. To the Nations is a podcast of Wheaton College, Illinois, that features Wheaton College Graduate School alumni, primarily Billy Graham scholars around the world. They share stories of God's activity in their lives and where they serve. The title reflects the nature of Jesus, the Son and Word of God being sent to the nations, and his followers also being sent to the nations. Please let us know you're listening by engaging on social media. Like, follow, share, subscribe, and comment. You can find us on wheaton.edu/listen and most places podcasts are found. For scholarship information for Wheaton College Graduate School, please visit wheaton.edu/Billy Graham Scholarships. Hello, my name is April McLaughlin. I am the Billy Graham Scholarship Program Coordinator here at Wheaton College Graduate School in Wheaton, Illinois. This podcast features stories from those in Christian service around the globe to inform and inspire. Thank you for listening. I've heard someone quote the start of Psalm 23 like this: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures." I think some of us need help slowing down, so maybe that's why he makes us lie down in green pastures, while others may need help being more productive. My guest today is Michael Wagner. Mike graduated in 2007 from Wheaton with his master's in evangelism and leadership. He had received the Billy Graham Pre-Filled Missionary Award, which paid for his degree. He repaid Wheaton by deploying overseas and working for the Lord. He completely retired his debt in 2014. Mike has been with the mission organization Pioneers in the Philippines as chairman of the board and in the Netherlands as the executive director of Pioneers Europe. About 3 months ago, the family returned to the U.S., and your words, Mike, for it were a massive upheaval, which I can understand. Thankfully, they have had some reentry and debrief time since returning and are making future ministry plans. Thanks so much for your time and transparency about this huge transition and season of your life. Mike, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be with you.
So your ministry experience is broad and fascinating, and you would probably have a million stories to tell us, but today we're going to focus on just this transition part of your life, because I feel like a lot of people have this in their life. It might not be from country to country or ministry to ministry. There's all kinds of transitions. So I'm thinking that some of the things you've been learning could help a lot of us. But I wanted to start with something very interesting you shared with me recently. It sounded like extreme sports to me. I see these videos of people doing really crazy, dangerous things, and that's what this sounded like. And so was this a motorcycle or a dirt bike? What was this that you were telling me about?
In the Philippines, for a few of my years living in Manila, I had a street legal dirt bike, which was not uncommon.
Okay.
And it helped me wiggle through traffic a bit. But a couple times I was able to get outside of Manila. And one time I was able to ride along a ridge of a volcano. Just outside of Manila.
Yeah, I want to hear more about that, but let's save that for the end. And We'll dive into some other things here. So bring us back to Wheaton and tell us some memories that you might have from Wheaton.
Yeah, I have very fond memories of Wheaton days. I think one of my biggest takeaways from my time at Wheaton was, my program was focused on the shift of Western and American culture, postmodern and post-Christian culture. And so what does that mean for gospel ministry, for evangelism in light of these massive shifts? And that was in 2007, so it's 14 years later. We're all aware of this. At that time, it was just church leaders were becoming quite aware of it and adjusting to them. One of my biggest takeaways was understanding that the gospel is not just about reconciliation between individuals and God, but between individuals and God, individuals and each other, and with the relationship with creation. In other words, God reconciling all things to himself in Jesus. And I walked away from Wheaton asking how this kind of gospel could be lived out.
Yeah, what does that mean, reconciliation with creation?
Yeah, it could mean a few things. I recognize that for some folks in the evangelical church, this could be a bit of a controversial thing. Restoring right relationship is another way to say it. Using creation for the betterment of all people's lives, not just exploiting resources, for example, for one's own gain or gain of a company, gain of a particular country, the gain of your family, but recognizing the interconnectedness of all of us, including how we use creation, whether it's mining and natural resources, or it's pollution, or it's managing disease with health, and all these kinds of things. Using these things as God intends us to, and being good stewards of God's creation.
Right. Well, that was one of the initial commands to us, so that makes complete sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's part of what's being made in the image of God.
Yeah.
And using it in ways that promote life, not only life of creation, but promote the life in human beings.
Mm-hmm. I wish we had time for that too. So we'll go on. Could you walk us through what brought you back to the U.S. then?
Sure. I had two childhood dreams. One was when I was 13, I had received a sense of calling into mission. I was with my youth group from Upper Midwest, went down to Deep South, working with a rural church and crossing some racial lines. And the youth pastor was helping us understand God reconciling people across racial, ethnic lines. And it's a beautiful thing. And we did some service projects. But one night in the chapel, I was on my knees in prayer during a worship time with the youth group. And in my mind, I saw a map of the Philippines and saw myself walking down a street with what I presumed was a Filipino-looking guy, and I sensed God saying to me he wanted me to go there someday. And I grew up in a Baptist church. This sort of thing caught my attention. It wasn't outside the realm of possibilities of how we experienced the Lord in that particular church, but it was quite unique for that tradition and for my experience. Got my attention. I sensed God calling me to the Philippines. So we went to the Philippines to send out missionaries. I did that with pioneers. I found that I was decent at launching and leading organizations, and I thought that launching and leading mission agencies might be my contribution to global Christian missions for years to come. So I was asked to move to Europe to restructure the Pioneers Missionary Sending Office there to send people from across the continent to unreached around the globe. My wife and I then determined in the summer of 2020 that it was time for us to pursue my other childhood dream, and that's launching or leading a business and exploring how business can be used for the kingdom and for sharing the good news. I also decided to move into this new direction to more easily and directly have evangelistic conversations and more easily flesh out this gospel of the kingdom idea that I began considering, especially during my Wheaton days. So for several reasons, personal and professional, we decided to move back to the U.S. We determined that if the Lord allowed, we would make space for a time of rest and recuperation or sabbatical during the first half of 2021 before we moved to the U.S. I determined that I was quite depleted. And we've been involved in cross-cultural ministry for 13 years by that point. And I had experienced some challenges, of course, and I hadn't had a significant period of rest and recuperation. And my organization, Pioneers, recommends people take sabbatical every 7 to 10 years. As I looked into this sabbatical more, I also heard from other organizations, Christian leaders, counselors, and such that, it's common that it's highly advised to take a sabbatical every, around 7 to 10 years to refresh, recuperate, and reflect, and then recalibrate for the next season of life and ministry.
Okay. And what did you learn about the signs of burnout?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I actually didn't quite understand burnout or sabbatical before this period of time. I can't say I was burnt out. I was borderline, though. I now recognize or understand more fully that some natural human limits.
Yeah.
I recognized that I had some level of fatigue. I was irritable about ministry or about certain things that I recognized was from fatigue and not from a normal place of considering. So
not the normal fatigue, like an overall pervasive fatigue, maybe.
Yeah, and it wasn't to the point where I couldn't get out of bed. So it wasn't clinical burnout, definitely not. But it was in that orange kind of area. And I recognized that when we were discerning for our next steps, we would probably move back to one of the considerations was, okay, which country are we going to live in? We're going to continue in the Netherlands. That's where we were living at the time. And are we going to continue there? We decided no, families back in the U.S. Our kids are at an age in school that it's like move now or 10 years from now. So we decided now's the time to move back to the U.S. where we're from. This would be our fourth international move, or was. Wow. We know the kind of upheaval and energy it takes to make a move. So I just said, you know what, with where my energy levels are at, it may not go well if I don't get a break. And thankfully, my board and pioneers supported that move.
And then when you met with someone to guide you through the sabbatical time, what was maybe one of the most helpful things?
So Pioneers has a sabbatical guide that I found helpful, and it's based on navigators. In addition, I asked a Dutch Christian psychologist who works almost exclusively with Dutch and foreign missionaries as well as Christian ministers. And it's actually a whole team of Christian psychologists, but the particular one I met with has expertise in helping with burnout. So I had her do some assessment. I wanted to see from an expert third-party perspective, where am I at exactly? Are there unhealthy patterns? Could I have implement healthier patterns? And I asked her to help me get started and coach me. In addition, I wanted her to help me process some challenges or hurts from a ministry engagement. I did some assessments, paper assessments, and then an interview or two with her. And she helped me see, indeed, you're tired, and borderline burnt out. It's really good that the Lord gave you space right now to do this, because if you didn't take this, you probably would have gone towards burnout. She also helped me see that actually my normal patterns in life, my habits, are relatively healthy. There weren't any major shifts in my habits to maintain health. There are a couple tweaks, which she helped me realize is, hey, you've been through 13 years of cross-cultural ministry, and you've lived in 3 countries in that period of time, raising 3 kids in 3 countries. I mean, our kids have been with us all the way through, but we've as a family been in 3 different countries. And then in 2018 to 20, I dealt with a couple challenging situations, and all of that together, it just sort of built up over the years. Even with connecting with the Lord and connecting with my wife and kids, and going on some holiday, taking some breaks, having a Sabbath, trying to do that once a week, those sorts of things. Even with that, I was still worn out. I understand now why sabbaticals are helpful and why a lot of organizations encourage their members to take sabbatical every 7 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot going on.
That sounded like that was a really important step to take, to have that person to really process.
Yeah, I'm the kind of person, my wife and I, that we find we don't just go to Christian psychologists when things are on fire or it's collapsed. We go for checkups to get an expert third-party perspective, the assessment and analysis, as well as to provide some helpful advice. So we've done this 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
We haven't done it often, but we've done it 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
To check in on this or that for family or marriage, or in this case, related to fatigue and burnout and sabbatical and coaching with sabbatical.
That sounds great. So you mentioned healthy patterns, unhealthy patterns. Could you fill us in a little bit on what you've learned in that area?
Yeah. One of the things that the psychologist did highlight was, she said, I think your workout routine is one thing that kept you from going into clinical burnout. So that was a way that your body could deal with the adrenaline and the stress.
Okay, so an exercise routine.
Exercise routine.
Okay.
And being in Europe, having 5 weeks of holiday, I mean, Americans laugh at it.
Wow, 5 weeks.
I know, yes. See, Americans laugh at it, but it's very helpful work-life balance. The Europeans helped me, and some people in Pioneers, over my 13 years of ministry experience, helped me realize that it's important to take some time away, to unplug. When we first got to the field, we didn't know if we should take holiday, and then we didn't know because we're on support, so we didn't know if donors would be okay with it, and we didn't know how God would feel about it, and then some of our coworkers were at a different socioeconomic background, a different level of financial level, and so we had to be careful about money related to those kind of relationships. And we eventually came to a good balance. I had a leader in Pioneers who he got after me one time for not taking a holiday.
Okay.
So this is very early in our years in the Philippines field, and we realized, no, God has given us human limits, and we need to respect them. Another thing is making sure I'm spending time with the Lord, and getting time with friends or my wife and kids, supportive kind of relationships.
Yeah. So you mentioned physical, the rest, the exercise, the social, the spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those different areas. Yeah, I think your comment about taking vacation in a different culture, I guess you had to have a theological decision about that, a cultural decision, a financial decision about that. That was interesting comment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think every new missionary has to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
What you think about entertainment, what you think about rest,
Yeah.
what you think about
Yeah.
holiday. Exactly. What's your theology? What's your philosophy?
Uh-huh.
And have to come down to understand like what's best for your family, what's best for the ministry, what will make you most faithful and effective.
Right. And still
Right.
relatable with the folks that you're working with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then I think you also, in our earlier discussions, you were talking about the things you were telling yourself, right?
Yeah.
About maybe unhealthy beliefs. Maybe it was related to rest, but what else did you have to share about those areas?
In 2018 to 20, as I've already mentioned, it was an especially challenging period. So I got to see myself under quite some stress. And of course, it's not pleasant, but there are positives. Tested, got to see what I was made out of. Got to see what happens mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically when I'm under quite some stress for a decent period of time.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of the things I recognized during that period, but especially during the sabbatical, and then implemented some practices to deal with them. One is I can be quite impatient about the progress of how things develop, how the organization develops, how the project develops. I can push a bit. So people who I lead wouldn't recognize it. A lot of the pushing, the impatience is I have in my mind and in my in my own
Oh,
psychology.
it's
And I,
inside of you, but you held
yeah,
back from pushing other people.
yeah, a bit. And I've had to learn to recognize natural parameters, natural progress, and be okay with that. Recognize
Mm-hmm.
God's timing of things. It's not to say we shouldn't work hard, we shouldn't push, but I
Mm-hmm.
needed to relax about the timing of how things develop. Another thing is related to my desire to control. And I think all of us are this way to a certain extent, but some of us may be more prone to it than others. When I'm confronted with a challenging situation, I want to understand it. I can
Mm-hmm.
ruminate. I want to
Mm-hmm.
understand every nuance and figure it out. And it takes up energy. I actually found during that 2018 to 20 that when I would pray about things that I was concerned about, sometimes I would leave those prayer times more stressed than when I started.
Mm.
Because during these prayer times, I'd be thinking about this issue and going round and around, and trying to give it to the Lord, but there was still this trying to grasp for understanding, grasp for something,
Right.
So fall of 2019, came across a couple of especially helpful books. The two books were Peter Scazzero's book, Emotionally Healthy Leader, and another book called Into the Silent Land by Martin. I'm going to have to come back to you on the name. That one.
Sure.
Sorry. But Emotionally Healthy Leader, Peter Scazzero helpfully brings together his understanding of psychology and theology. He's a pastor in New York City. The book comes out of his experience of applying the wisdom of psychology and the wisdom of theology. It comes out of his experience with leading a team. And one of the things he does talk about is taking sabbatical. Into the Silent Land talks about some of these ancient Christian practices of prayer and of silence. And since then, I've implemented some very simple practices that have helped me to experience what it is to be still and know that He is God. And to stop, as we so often do, rather than stopping for prayer, when I stop to pray, I think about all my concerns, and then I start the commentary on those concerns. Start on the commentary and the commentary,
And trying to
and
figure out what the solution
trying to figure
is,
out
right?
and wrestling and
Yeah.
trying to grasp because I want to have a certain thing happen in that prayer time, and I want to
Uh-huh.
leave the prayer time with a certain experience.
Yeah, an
And these
answer.
and an answer exactly, and or I want to feel a certain way or think a certain way or have an yeah. And these simple practices of contemplation, just being still with God, help me to identify the commentary of the commentary, and then the commentary, and then the thought, and the concerns, and my feelings about it, and to just release it to the Lord,
Mm.
give it to Him, and to stop trying to do something with those
Mm.
things, except to recognize I'm not my thoughts, I'm not this situation. No, I am a child of God, I am God's creation. Through Jesus, I'm one with God, and I can experience his peace and love and joy.
Mm.
I don't need all the answers right now. It's not that I shouldn't apply myself to, to work hard to figure things out, to work through the questions. There's a time and a place for that. But at the root, my day to day, moment by moment, just have a gentle focus in the Lord. Be still and know that he's God.
Mm. So it sounds like you're quite the doer, right, Mike? And then this has brought a different dimension into your life.
Yeah, I would say so. I am a doer. I can sit down and take a rest. Life just is difficult sometimes.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And sometimes if the Lord allows, we need to slow down for a significant period of time and let him speak. When I stopped in sabbatical last January of this year, within 2 or 3 weeks, I had signed up for a triathlon. I had signed up for guitar lessons. I wanted to get back into guitar. I signed up for piano lessons. There's one or two other things.
Whoa.
And all of these things would give life, and I did do some of them during the sabbatical. But when people would ask me, "What are you doing?" I would feel the need to say, "I'm on a sabbatical, but I'm doing this and this and this." And that just
Interesting.
and I'd gone into the sabbatical expecting that there might be some of this identity crisis. But I nevertheless, over the course of the first couple weeks, realized this tendency that I had to respond in this way. And through a prayer time, I just sensed the Lord saying, just let all of that go. At that time, I also had questions about the future, about the move back to the U.S. and what specific next steps we're going to take. And I just sensed the Lord saying, no, I've given you this space to not be spending all your time, your prayer time talking about next steps or planning or ministry questions. All just be and let that go. And the proper time, we'll get into some of these practical questions. Yeah, but just let it be. Be okay for your identity in this time to be that you are on sabbatical, that you aren't working, that even in your sabbatical, you don't need to tell people the list of things you're doing.
Yeah.
Your value is being God's creation. Identity is not what you produce, not in being busy. It's about being God's child.
Oh, that's good. So is some of that what you would tell a new missionary?
Certainly, I would say that's one of the most important things to tell a new missionary. This is what we did when I was sending out missionaries the last handful of years. This cycle of Sabbath or this cycle of burnout. Cycle of workaholism. Question for every new missionary is, what is your motivation? And I don't know if we can always tell what our motivation is until we're in the thick of it and we see what we're willing to give up, what we're willing to do, whether that's good or bad. When the rubber meets the road, we see what we really value and how we see ourselves, how we see other people. And I think it would be helpful to have develop some sort of a reflection habit, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual, a new missionary and a spouse if they have one, or teammates. Try to ask these questions in a concerted way. What's your identity? Are you striving after something? Are you resisting something in an unhealthy way? Does it seem that you're operating out of a workaholism, needing to please God or to please somebody, or are you operating out of a place of rest and of Sabbath? Are you operating out of a place, a sense of acceptance by God and God's love?
Those are hard to discern sometimes, aren't they?
They are. So then the next question is, okay, how do you discern that? Is it?
Yeah.
And there are certain behaviors that we can identify, certain mental processes. There are checklists out there.
You have to be ruthlessly honest with yourself, it sounds like.
I agree. Yeah.
Not everyone can do that.
No, and we have blind spots too. And that's why we need community as much as possible. Sometimes in the mission field, especially when we're first in the field, it can be quite isolating. At the time of greatest upheaval, greatest stress, we are the most disconnected from social support systems and a system that would help us see our blind spots. And international cross-cultural ministry, especially in those early years or during times of conflict or transition, times of change, we see what we're made of. They're challenging. But the good part is we see our strengths, but we also see our weaknesses and what we can work on.
Yeah, that's very good. And how is your family doing right now?
They're doing quite well. This was our smoothest international transition, smoother than we expected.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. Any international move is quite an upheaval, but this one was the smoothest. Yeah, kids are getting involved in school, enjoying it, and my wife and I are arranging our next steps in life and ministry.
Okay. Yeah, lots of change.
Yeah, lots of change. So, but still for the same ministry purpose, to see people know Jesus and experience God's presence in their lives and the healing and reconciliation in
Mm-hmm.
every aspect of their lives. And
Yeah.
seeing the marketplace impacted with the kingdom.
Mm-hmm. Well, I certainly wish you well in all of that, Mike, and your family well too.
Thank you.
So as we conclude, could you tell us the rest of the story about your extreme sports and your dirt bike and the volcano? You didn't fall in.
Yes,
So.
I did. I didn't fall in. Yes, I loved that Honda. I think it was a Honda XR 250 for the listeners who know what that is. Street legal. I had a meeting about 3 hours south of Manila, and in between Manila and my destination, there's this ancient supervolcano called Tall Volcano. So at the top of this ridge, overlooking a lake, a volcanic lake, with an active volcano in the middle. And
Oh,
a little smoke coming out of the volcano, and it actually recently erupted. But
wow. A
and
volcano
so then
in a volcano. Wow.
volcano. So then I was able to. I rode along this ridge. It was just unbelievable. It was like one of those moments where you just have to pinch yourself, like, am I really here riding on this ridge? This country is gorgeous. Maybe traffic in Manila is crazy, but there's moments like that when you see these green, beautiful volcanoes, and just unbelievable. Yeah.
Oh, that's a great story. I could sort of imagine it. I wish I had a picture of it. You already mentioned your book recommendation, so that was great. It was Peter Scazzero's Emotionally Healthy Leader, right? That
Hmm.
sounded like it was a very impactful book for you.
Yeah, the Pioneers had us read it as part of a leadership development program, and I would recommend it to every Christian leader, but not just Christian leaders. I would recommend it to everyone. Yeah, the other book I mentioned was Into the Silent Land, and that's by Martin Laird,
Okay.
and that's helped me to consider some of the prayer practices of Christians.
Very good. Thank you so much for that. Would you
Mhm.
close us in a brief prayer, Mike? Thank you.
Father, we thank you for your presence, your abiding presence with us always. We thank you that you accept us, have, do, and always will. You love us, and you never leave us. You're always with us. Thank you for your grace, for your forgiveness, demonstrated on the cross. What an incredible love. And God, we want to experience moment by moment, day to day, what it is to be one with Christ and the peace and the love that comes with that, the calm. And for those who are listening, who are anxious, who are stressed, who are impatient, Father, that they would experience your calm omnipresence and that you would remind us of your character, who you are, who we are in you. God, that we would live and minister from a place of rest, not of trying to earn acceptance or achieve something in an unhealthy way for unhealthy reasons. But God, that we would recognize the parameters you've given and accept them and be okay with it. And care for others and lead others, our families and friends, ministries, organizations, teams, that we would lead from a place of peace and of joy and that recognizes the parameters of others and helps them to live a balanced life, balanced work life, balanced personal life. We want to be effective for your kingdom and productive, but God, we want to do it also in a way that in which we really express your character and experience your presence. We love you, God, and I thank you so much for my years at Wheaton and for the Billy Graham program and its impact in my life and so many. We pray this in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Mike, for your time and your great input.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm glad to be with you and so very thankful for my years at Wheaton and for the support that the Billy Graham program gave for me, my wife, and our ministry.
Thank you for listening. Psalm 131 is a perfect capstone to what Mike has shared. O Lord, my heart is not lifted up. My eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me. But I have calmed and quieted my soul, like a weaned child with its mother. Like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord, from this time forth and forevermore. Listen in next time as John reports on how their team in Japan reflects the joy of the Lord and abundant life in contrast to the culture of suicide.